All right, hello everyone. As our panelists get settled here, I'm gonna have each of them briefly introduce themselves, and since we're talking about skills, I'll have each of you just briefly tell us about a skill that you've learned recently.
All right, I'm going first. I'm Don Erb. I'm a VP of Corporate Development for CollegeNET. A lot of you heard Jim speak earlier about what we're doing at CollegeNET. We've got a lot of technologies we've developed that we're bringing to the HR space, so we're excited about that. Excited to meet all of you. A skill recently developed, I would say painting, okay? So these guys will not top painting. They're like, oh my gosh, you did painting. So my background has always been in finance, but more sort of my left side of my brain has been painting. And I kind of did it for a while. Never really, I was kind of an intermediate slope, to put it in local parlance at best. Beyond bunny slope, but I was kind of intermediate slope. And what really pushed it up for me was I started painting with my son just a couple months ago. And we would set up two canvases side by side. We would draw from the same paint. I'd work on his painting, he'd work on mine, we'd switch back and forth, we'd keep going, and a ton of what we would call social connectivity happening here, a ton of peer review, peer access, peer feedback, peer criticism, a lot of that was happening, and mentoring, because he had never done anything in art, hadn't studied any of that. I was an art minor in college, so I'm digging up all these old books, and I had to teach him. So sort of the takeaway for me was, if you want to improve a skill or focus on a skill, back yourself into a mentoring situation, because you have to, if you really want to learn something, get yourself in a situation where you got to teach somebody else. That was the lesson for me, and it really moved up. And we're very proud of all the work we've done. A couple heirlooms that will be valued for many hundreds of years, I'm sure. He's colorblind. I don't know if I mentioned that. So we'll have like a green moon, and my wife will be like, "Why do you have a green moon?" Well, this is the landscape on Jupiter. This is Jupiter where you have green moon. But we've had a blast with that. So that's kind of the only thing I can think of that I've gotten a little bit better at lately.
Great.
I'm Steve Arntz, co-founder and CEO of Campfire. And I would say the skill that I've learned lately is board game design. I've been working with my 9-year-old building a board game.
Cool.
And so it's been a lot of fun learning card design and play testing and all those sorts of things.
Fun.
Afternoon, my name is Nate Miller. I'm a Vice President of Learning, Culture, and Development for Vivint, recently acquired by NRG. And I'm a youth football coach, which is a lifelong aspiration of mine. And what I have been learning how to do is how to cut up video to make my own end of season highlight videos.
Awesome.
My YouTube channel has tens and tens of views.
Dozens of followers.
Yeah.
And they change over every year, so.
Yeah.
That's great.
Trent Savage, nice to be with you. Head of HR and training for Mountain America Credit Union. My skills, I'll give you two. So one I'd give you, but if I talked about it, some of you wouldn't like it, so we'll let that one go. But another one is, I've always been a trail rider on horses, but I'm starting to learn more of the skill of actually teaching and training them, which has been fun for me. My wife's been good at it. She's helping me, and I'm going through some of that. On the work side, I would say I'm a lifelong student of strategy and org design. I think strategy in particular is a skill that in HR, business strategy is very important for us to know, because it helps us think about how do we influence the strategy of the business.
Cool.
Marcus Cazier, Director of Learning and Development for bioMérieux. We are a
Will you say that with an accent, please?
bioMérieux. We are based out of France. We are a global medical diagnostics company, and there's about 16,000 of us globally, and about 3,000 of us work here in the Salt Lake Valley. Oh, and something I learned, chicken.
Chicken.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I have recently perfected cooking a chicken breast.
Wow.
I can nail it. I've been working on it for a couple
What
months,
was
and
that?
I got it done.
I
We
agree.
play
We
that
should
back?
clap for that.
Got the audio, play that back.
I guess I should say something. I've also gotten into painting watercolor specifically.
Oh, those are hard.
Recently.
Yeah, those
so
are hard.
that's been my thing as of late. So Trent, we're going to start with you. Lay out the stakes for us here. How often do workers typically need a skills change? And is that rate speeding up, especially with new technology and how fast that's going?
Yes, drastically. So a couple things I'd say. So a couple months ago, I heard that in the workplace this year in the US alone, 4 million workers departed the workforce in I think it was 2023. So if you think about that, that's significant in and of itself. You can go look at any research from an economist, the Kim Gardner Institute, multiple institutes talk about the decline in birth rates. So I think that, we've talked about this for a couple of years, but I think we're actually starting to really see it, where there's going to be an increase in departing workers and the incoming group is smaller. And so that creates a significant problem. Like I would say from an HR perspective, if you're not looking at that data and having discussions with your business leaders, you should, because in the next, I'd call it 2-3, now Utah has a higher birth rate, but if you have across the country or global, this will be a significant problem. And I would argue even in Utah, it's going to be a significant problem. So if you're not thinking about that in terms of talent shortage, you should be, because that is going to have a major impact. Second, on the skills piece, there's some research that I've seen, and they all vary a little bit, but on average, what I've seen is about a third of any person's skills are changing out about every 2.5 to 3 years. I would say, we were just talking about AI, and I think that probably has the ability to impact that quickly, where that will accelerate that. So if you think about that, if we're not being thoughtful about helping our workforce reskill quickly, there's going to be a lot of people that we're going to have to be exiting because they don't have the skills. And if you think about the talent shortage, so we have this really unique dynamic time frame that I think we're coming up within the next 5 years, that if we're not thoughtful about, our businesses are really going to be impacted. And HR, this is a place where we need to be leading the way.
And Marcus, what's the business case for teaching new skills rather than just, letting people go, keeping them in the company?
Sure. So like Trent said, about 1 in 3 skills are expiring every couple of years. Additionally, we see the number of skills needed per job posting. It's been going up by about 6% annually for the last decade. So you need more skills, and those skills you need more of, they're expiring faster. So part of my business case would be you're never going to hire your way out of your skills deficits. You're going to have a lot more success if you focus on developing known talent and investing in them to help you close some of those skills gaps you've got. I don't know, keep going, or is that good?
Anyone else want to add?
I mean, one of the critical skills that you need is context with your business. And so trying to hire for those specific skills while ignoring the context that people bring to the company and business and problems and the connection points that they have with the people inside those organizations. Like, you can't hire for that. You're going to have to develop that. So which one do you want to develop? Get good at developing skills so that you can keep the people who have the context and connection to your mission and purpose and all of those sorts of things. If you've actually managed to adopt one of those that's strong enough to retain your folks, it's much better to build the skill capability.
Context and the culture.
Yeah,
Culture of your
I was going to
organization,
actually ask you next, how do you even go about deciding where to start, and what is the context for your business, and how do you even jump into this pool?
Yeah, we're in an interesting time at Vivint where we've recently been acquired. Our business model is shifting on its own, but now we're having to execute this business strategy in the context of an entirely new parent company that has different operating rhythms, cultures, and everything. And all of this is forcing our folks to have to learn while everything's changing on them. And so we find ourselves having to really double down on really solid adult learning principles so that we can't be sloppy in our training, because we have to be in our development exercises, because we just don't have the luxury of being slow to get people up to speed. So we have to be really sound there, and so we're investing in that capability. We're also evaluating technologies that will help us stay ahead. We were discussing in the green room just before about how quickly things are changing, and even predicting and seeing around corners, which we like to talk about, is quite difficult. And so learning how to be very adaptable and helping leaders help recognize and develop their teams, it's a constant challenge, but it's very stimulating work as well.
Yeah.
One of the things with adaptability that we're seeing out in the market is decentralization of budgets around the reskilling efforts. And so you've got a traditionally very top-down focus of like, we've got the budget at the top level and we're going to implement these programs across the organization. And I still think there's a place for that, particularly in like leadership development and some other areas. But when we're talking about like the skills that frontline workers and then the frontline managers need, they're the ones that have the context and know which skills they're going to need to adapt and to be that adaptable, right? And so like, you have to start thinking about how your money's spent. So like, do we need to split 50-50 where we're decentralizing and allow people to choose the developmental opportunities that they need to build the skills that they need in the moment, or taking these top-down programs and initiatives where, like you said, it's like almost impossible to predict at that higher level what people are going to need and to be that kind of adaptable and responsive. So.
And did you have something?
I was just going to say, I think having and building and promoting a culture that looks internally to find people that want different opportunities, find different ways to grow within the organization. The very act of having that type of culture will, help obviously with retention. It will, diminish your hiring costs because you're continually investing in your own folks. And I think that just the very act of having that type of culture is going to continue to build and help people stay there. And that, having a strong culture helps keep people there, but it also helps draw more people in because the reputation of the culture is out there that this is an organization that invests in growth. This is an organization that invests in its people to keep expanding. And a lot of people want to be part of that. There's, some 56% of the people, I made that number up by the way, 50% of people left their job because they didn't see areas to grow. They were frustrated, they didn't see a path. So that was part of the reason they left, but it remained 55, it's in that area. So a very high percentage of people get frustrated where they are because they're not asked. Even if they're not asked, hey, would you be interested in reskilling? Would you be interested? Just not being asked is a way that can, I think, diminish motivation, I think, too, by employees.
Which, as we've talked about how quickly things are changing, that you probably don't even know what skills people are going to need, with AI and everything. Having a culture of learning could probably help. Steve, could you elaborate on that, that culture of learning that you've been cultivating at Campfire?
So Campfire, culture of learning, really starts with the leader. So when you think of learning and development, organizations, there's fabulous organizations out there that will just absolutely inspire the hell out of your people. They'll bring in these expert speakers and you'll get that inspiration spike and then you'll drop. So you watch that TED Talk by, why can't I think of his name? Simon Sinek, right? I forgot his name. He'd be so offended. Start with why, right? And he inspires the hell out of you and then he drops you. It's like, well, what do we do with this, right? Those inspire moments are critical though. They're really key. Especially with executives, you get them inspired by some new idea and it's like, okay, we can create change inside of this organization. We get really passionate about that. Then we start to teach things. And so we might take Simon and say, Simon says let's train some people internally on Start With Why. They'll be Start With Why certified, and now they'll go teach across the organization. You get half the spike that you do with Simon, and then half the slope down. So it's a slower slope of deterioration of that skill. Now, guess what happens if you enable the leader to teach Start With Why to their team? You get the same spike as Train the Trainer. Everybody's probably heard of Train the Trainer, T3 model, right? You get the same spike as Train the Trainer, but guess what? It goes up into the right, into perpetuity. So what you need to do in terms of creating a culture of learning is you need to enable your leaders to inspire, teach, and coach, right? And Gallup's been telling us this for years, but how do you do that? So there's lots of different ways to do that, but creating that culture of learning starts with how do I get my leaders to instill their teams with this idea that we need to learn and develop and grow together, that we need to identify the problems within our context, and we need to find solutions to those problems together. And guess what? I'm here to connect you to the resources that you need. So Gartner did some great research on connector leaders being the most impactful and successful leaders. Those are the ones that connect you to the resources that you need. And that's how we kind of try to help people to do that.
Nate, on a more granular, I can talk, I'm on the radio.
Granular.
What's the process for kind of cataloging, here's the skills we need, here's what people have, here's, what we need next. How do you work around that?
So there's a few things that we've done. I think the role of the leader is really critical in that, frankly. We don't centralize that process. We don't try to be the experts on the learning team at understanding a catalog of skills and storing them in a technology. In fact, maybe our best example of this is we've asked all of our sales and installation technicians to get engaged in the revenue generating game. These are folks that have skill in troubleshooting, skill in installation, but they oftentimes chose this path because they didn't want to sell. And now we're asking them to go upgrade revenue, which is developing a whole different set of skills. And so what we've done, among a handful of things, is we've started to identify, we've got a whole process for developing those skills, and we support the development of those skills, but we actually have integrated those skills and profiling different levels of capability inside our scheduling software. So that when we assign jobs and we assign installation opportunities, we can put the most lucrative installation opportunities with the most skilled revenue generators. And so we actually, it's built into our scheduling software and not a training system. It's our scheduling system that manages that. But at the heart of it though, I think it's critical to understand the role of leaders. And we use a methodology, many of you probably are familiar with situational leadership by the Blanchard Company, right? We have spent a ton of time trying to help our leaders understand that when we introduce a new set of skills, they have to think differently about their workforce. They've moved to a different stage of development, and they have to operate differently as leaders, because there's not a bigger lever to your culture than your leaders. And culture will eat strategy for lunch, they say. And so, we've found that they now expanded to lunch. Oh, wow. It's breakfast and lunch. Wow. Most people are fasting in the morning. Okay. But we've really found that teaching our leaders how to think about learning and think about how they respond as leaders, because the way to be a successful leader is different today than it was 10, 15 years ago.
What about you, Don? What's the process that you guys have?
I think the technology that we've been talking about today with Focus Ring picks a slightly different twist as opposed to a leader-directed training or assessment, because Focus Ring is really originally oriented, it doesn't have to be that way, more on a peer review or peer assessment. So a prompt goes out, you respond to the prompt, and then you respond or evaluate 6, 7, 8 of your peers that just answered the same response. So it's a little more lateral in its orientation. It doesn't have to be, you could have management, reviewing all these prompts. But I think what we like about that is there's sort of a nice attribute of learning from your peer group. These are the folks that are playing the same role as you in the organization, and this is the way that they address this particular customer challenge question, or they address this product knowledge question. And then you're in that role every day, and you're thinking, well, that's the same person as me, that's the same role as me. I wouldn't have maybe answered it that way, but I like how that was phrased. And so when you're doing those reviews, you are picking up how other people answered the same question you did, and I think that helps people learn sort of an immediate skill. And then what we then do is we then get the output, and you can imagine this bar chart, distribution curve that says this is how we did on this question as a group. We averaged around 7, that's great, but we got some over here that just peer review based were 8s and 9s. I mean, they just answered the question. Everybody, all of you rated it really highly. And then we have some 4s and 5s that could probably use some tips on how to answer that. Well, we can then take those 8s and 9s and immediately send those responses easily to the 4s and 5s, and they're immediately learning almost indirect mentoring happening on the fly, right? With a couple button clicks. And then if you're looking for mentors in general, and you're doing these surveys over time, and you got a team that just keeps getting 8s and 9s, well, they're obviously a good candidate to become mentors over time. They've demonstrated, that they keep skewing
up
highly.
the
And you
eights
can
and
connect
nines
them where they
with
go.
your loved
Yeah,
ones.
and one of the things we just got into is we have a scatter plot where it might be product knowledge versus enthusiasm, right? Let's say those are the attributes we were measuring. Well, you could click in the upper right-hand corner, and that's someone with a high product knowledge and high enthusiasm. So who's that? What was that answer? We got to get that circulated. So that I think we have put a lot of effort in and around the peer review part of it, because it has I think a certain amount of authenticity to it because they're your peer group. And the other thing is in remote workforces where 25% of the employee base is somewhere else, and that's quadrupling over the next couple of years. Then, and I made those numbers up by the way. And then, but this allows you to see peers answer questions that you just answered from another state. They're doing your job in another state, so it does create a nice cultural connectivity among the peers, especially when people are remote and they feel disconnected. So
Yeah, and more of that culture of learning that we've
Yeah,
been talking
yeah.
about. Steve, what are some of so we've talked about, how we figure out what needs to be taught. What are some of the emerging techniques and technologies that can actually then go and help teach these people once you know what they need?
Oh, that's good. And I talked about the leaders.
I said Steve, I meant Trent. I was
Okay.
looking at Trent.
Well, I was ready.
almost, Steve.
I was ready. Trent, this is you, dude.
Why are you
Go.
looking at me?
You want me to go?
Yeah, I'll go after you.
Okay. So
You're on a roll.
I like this question,
I
but you
know.
can go, dude.
Well, I kind of liked it for you, so go ahead, I'll go.
Okay.
You can go.
Correct it.
Correct
Steve,
it for
Steve,
me.
you go first, and then we'll go to Trent.
Yeah. I was really nervous. I'm like, I didn't hear this question in prep. So emerging technologies. So one of the emerging technologies is the fact that we're distributed and remote, which has given us access to a whole slew of different capabilities now. And so Zoom and Teams have they've become the de facto place for us to communicate and have conversations. But I'm telling you right now, whether Campfire builds it or somebody else does, it is inevitable that we are going to have video-based technology that gives us a co-pilot to our conversations, okay? So right now, engineers are using what's called Copilot to write better and faster code. So they're sitting there and they have an AI partner helping them write code. Zoom and Teams might do it, I doubt they will, but someone will build a conversations Copilot to where your leaders are now able to inspire, teach, and coach without having to be taught how to do it, because they just have an AI assistant right next to them. Okay, and so they're going to be able to help you to have career conversations, performance conversations, expectations conversations, your PIP conversation, your layoff conversation. Everything is going to go better because we're going to actually have an assistant to go along right alongside with us. So the emerging technology around all of this is AI. The internet was a small boom compared to what this big boom is going to be. And what is it going to do for us? I have no idea, but I do know that we're going to have a co-pilot for our conversations. It's going to enable our leaders to be more effective than they've ever been before.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Steve on that. I will say in HR, one of my biggest frustrations, frankly, is technology. And does anybody work from Workday here today? Okay, then I'll hold my comments. So we have Workday. And I would just say, as I look across some of the technology platforms in HR, I don't know about you, but I'm frustrated. It's we don't have what we really need to get where we want to go with the business. And I have a good friend of mine, Rob Lifford. Rob, are you here? I don't know if Rob's here. Rob, are you hiding? He's almost as mythical as the Loch Ness Monster. But Rob told me a couple years ago after COVID that the VC venture capital funding kind of shifted away from finance and fintech to HR. And I was like, hallelujah, because we need it. But I do think that I'm seeing the early signs of some great technology coming out that I think will leverage AI that will help us, because a lot of the stuff we're trying to build, in HR, if you've ever built a competency model, it takes so much work. And as soon as you build it, it's outdated. And that's becoming even harder now. I think with things like AI, that will help you get to the skills faster. 80%, you have 20% that you have to update and some of those things for roles and other things. So I think there are things like that. I totally agree with the Copilot as a huge one. That works, you can put in criteria for learning and some of those other things. So I think the technology's coming. I've seen some technologies out there that I'm excited. I don't think they're quite ready, but they're close. But the one thing I would suggest, I just would reiterate what you guys are saying. If you don't have a learning minded culture today, I would suggest that's where you start, pushing your leaders. I can tell you, when I got to Mountain America 5 years ago, people thought, oh, let's develop somebody. That meant send them to training. That does not work, right? We all know that. But the business didn't know that. The other piece that I would say is helping our leaders, or helping us as a function, be very thoughtful about connecting the development focuses that we have to on-the-job impact. If it doesn't impact the job, frankly, let's not waste our time on it. Sometimes we want to create all these elaborate models. Like my team, we've been talking about talent intelligence and how do you leverage data, AI, and technology to kind of build out this skill platform that, you can help people see where they are and where they want to go and all these things. It's cool, but the question is the business going to find value in that? And if they aren't, we need to be thoughtful in how we position that in a way that enables them to make sure that they find finding value in it. And so I would say start with a learning-minded culture. Start with helping our leaders think about on-the-job development. We know that, but how do we actually really help our leaders think about what are you doing, leader? And I think our leaders get tripped up on that. Like as we've been in this kind of learning development journey at Mountain America, I've learned it's really hard for leaders to pick up this development mindset. I was just talking about you, Rob. It's about time you get in here. So anyway, that's kind of one of the key things. I'd say from a technology perspective, early edges from my point of view. I think there's some good ones out there. I don't think they're, I'll give an example. There's skills-based, right? Well, if you want skills-based platforms, you've got to go to like one for hiring for candidates, and they don't necessarily have it connected to development. They don't have it necessarily connected to performance. And so you have to go to these multiple mediums to get there, and that's what's frustrating. My hope is we get one that enables us to take a more holistic look, because today a lot of what we have in HR is Frankenstein technology, which isn't a great user experience for our team members, employees.
I saw you nodding along, Marcus. Is there any mystical French technology, a bioMérieux we should know about?
No, we have all the same pain points. I don't know how we're going to successfully tackle skills mapping until we get our job catalog figured out and we get competencies attached to job titles. But like Trent said, they're changing very quickly. We're heavily relationship driven, though. That is an influence of our French culture. Relationships matter. And so we do have a strong emphasis on senior leaders developing. And so, we have our hypos who will mentor with a senior leader. We assign hypos to multifunctional projects across the org to give them exposure to different ideas, different regions, different needs that the company's trying to solve. It works well, relationship, from a relational standpoint. As we get bigger and bigger, we're up to 16,000 now, it's getting harder and harder. We can't scale with this relationship model. And so, yeah, we feel a lot of the same pain points. And it'd be nice if there was some magic software that could sit on top of our 4 other HRIS systems and pull that together, but it's not there.
Nate, there might be some workers who might feel a little like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to change. I don't want to, develop new skills. Some might be a little bit resistant, and you're going through some big changes right now at your company. Can you talk about how you've addressed some of those pain points?
There's been some real tough pain points, and I think the biggest thing is that people generally speaking, people respond well when they feel like they're growing and they're expanding the opportunities available to them, and so connecting them to those opportunities and what this development and this opportunity can create for them. I mentioned earlier about our installation and service technicians. Well, what's really interesting is there was a lot of reluctance to add this skill set of selling, and it drove a lot of attrition initially with this emphasis. And one of the things that I think that we have done to try and address that, one, is put an emphasis on leaders that are high learners themselves, that have a strong orientation to learning. And that allows them to help focus on helping our employees frame it as a learning experience versus thou shalt go and do this. And also The other thing we've tried to focus on is the importance of like the customer and taking care of the customer. And so it's shifting and reframing this from the skill and the threat of job security to the opportunity for development, the opportunity for greater security for their family. But I think dealing with the motivation issues are always super challenging. But what I think has been most successful, and I think this with my football team as well, is trying to appeal to that part of a person that wants to be really great and helping them connect to how learning and growing in development of a skill or in a capability can help them become great at what they're doing. And so I think for me, I'm a much stronger believer in trying to tap into that intrinsic value of motivation. And so when people are resisting, you try to, it's not super fancy, you try to reduce the things that are causing the friction and you increase the things that drive motivation. And so you look at policies, you look at risks and threats that people are feeling in their job. One of those examples is we stopped putting people on performance improvement plans when it came to their revenue performance in that particular group because they were working from a place of fear. And so we had to like redesign and retrain all of our leaders to stop when people weren't hitting metrics, putting people on performance improvement plans for their failures to deliver revenue goals. We had to shift it from a place of fear to a place of opportunity and growth, as by reducing the amount of threat in the environment.
Marcus?
Yeah, so as Nate was talking, I was thinking about kind of the outdated model of a career ladder, where we all think progression's vertical, and the only way you move up is you become a senior individual contributor, or you take your boss's job. When in reality, it can be more of a climbing wall type experience, right? Where going up may not always be the right move. You might need to go sideways first, and then you can go up, and then you got to go sideways again. And when it comes to these reorgs, and when it comes to a lot of the uncertainty that the Gen Z is dealing with in the workforce, you could lose your job for no fault of your own, just because some executive needs to hit their metrics that quarter. And that agility, that willingness to be flexible, to do what the business asks you to do, to quickly adapt to those new skills, I think it goes a long way in tapping into that desire to be excellent. It's not always about the money. Sometimes it is, but it's not always the money. Sometimes they want a better work-life balance, or sometimes they want to approach their potential. But sometimes it's money. But yeah, just being mindful of that and encouraging a more holistic approach, like Nate was mentioning.
You had something to add, Steve?
Yeah, so there's a company that used to be called Burning Glass. I think they've rebranded, but they do more skills research than maybe anybody else in the world. And the CEO of the company was telling me about a consulting project that they got brought in for with a large multinational organization. And they had just gone through a major layoff. We're talking like 10, 15% of a very large workforce. And they said, I need you to help me figure out who we need to hire in order to reskill our organization, because we just laid off the people we didn't need, and now we need to hire some new people with some new skills. And they did an assessment of the workforce, and they told this CEO, I'm sorry, but you really should hire back all the people you just fired. Like, for real. Like, they have the skills you need. And they have the context with your business, and you probably should have never laid them off. And so what does that story have to do with your question? Like, 80% of who we are already needs to kind of stay the same. And we have these transferable skills, and we've talked about them in terms of leadership development. You talked about customer focus. Like, that's a transferable skill across all sorts of roles. And like, we need to not freak people the hell out by telling them like, you need to reskill. It's like, no, like 80% of you is freaking amazing. And like your skills transfer across so many different things. And we need all of that, plus just like this little tweak, like it's not a huge, scary deal. Like, let's get you that one little skill to go with the 80% of you that's like already everything that the business needs. So that's my thought.
Don, you had something else to add?
Well, I just wanted to echo the comment too on finding and drawing people into the organization that have an interest in learning, an interest in ongoing growth. Those characteristics, finding those really in the hiring process to have a culture that is based upon ongoing learning and development, as opposed to if someone just happens to know a lot. Because what they may know a lot about may be irrelevant in 6 months or 10 months, and you need to have people that are that tendency to continue to want to learn. And I know within CollegeNET, we have so many new things being developed, weekly, different applications of how we could do things. And it's an extremely dynamic process. And part of our role is to be able to communicate that to the outside world. We have these red balloons, we're trying to keep in the air. And then another red balloon comes in and we got to keep that in the air. We have 10 new ideas. So it's always very challenging to do that. And then what we found over time is they start lining up. What we developed here actually helps this one happen, helps that one happen, and it gels more and more. So I think the ability to do the open field running, the all-round athlete type analogy, the flexibility, I've seen is super, super important in a smaller company or an entrepreneurial company that's shifting and pivoting and navigating all sorts of brand new seas is a really, really super critical to be able to have that kind of mentality.
Trent, what are some of the pitfalls that companies can fall into when it comes to wasted investment, poor communication, inefficiency, those kinds of things?
There's probably 2 or 3. We've hit a lot of them. So one for me is, do you have the right kind of learning mindset as an organization? If you don't have that, I think that's a huge pitfall. I would say today, in today's environment, one of the top 3 skills, I would argue top 2 skills that you need to have, 2. One is a learning mindset. That's one of the things I loved working at Amazon, is just the thought of curiosity and learning to ask good questions. It's a powerful skill. So that's one. And let me just give a short analogy of that. The number of times I have shared a model with somebody or something I want them to learn, and then I watch them vapor lock and not be willing to go try it, they don't have that growth mindset, right? They've got to be willing to take that and take risks on it and fail and learn and saying, hey, this is what I learned and this is what I do different next time, right? That's the person I always want to hire. I've found most of the times in my HR business partner jobs, I'm not going to find somebody that has the skills I want. I'm going to have to train them. So I look for that kind of skill, because if they can do that, I can train them on the other. The second one is change management. With all the change that's coming, if organizations don't have the ability to change, I think you're going to struggle to be successful in the next, decade. So I think those are 2 things to be watchful for. I think for us as HR and training development, it's how do we ensure that we're connecting our work to the needs of the business? We have to be connected to the business. We have to be solving business problems. A lot of times we come up with these really cool models. They look awesome. They sound cool. But when you get it into practical application, it doesn't work. If you're not solving a business problem, you shouldn't be doing it, period. So those are a couple pitfalls that I'd suggest that we be watchful of.
Nate, any other pitfalls you can think of?
I want to just add one comment, because I was thinking about what Trent's, the competency, the skill of learning. It reminds me, and I'm in a room full of fellow HR pros here, so a lot of us have probably used a selection method called STAR, right? And as a rubric for evaluating responses. I worked for a company who didn't use that. They used a framework called EARL. And the idea of EARL was, it's an acronym standing for experience, what action did they take, what result. That all feels very STAR-like, but the L in the EARL model, when they would teach their leaders to select talent, was for learning. The idea of being able to evaluate was the experience, what action did they take, what result did they take, and how did they learn. And to me, that was a helpful way of picking talent that has that competency. So I just wanted to add that thought to something practical you can take home and use right away. But I think the other pitfall is blindly chasing technology and spend without really understanding what business problem it's addressing. There's a lot of companies out there that are willing to sell you a spot solution or meet a very specific need or use case, but I think that could be a pitfall if you're assuming that just getting technology and implementing technology will solve the skill gap or whatever. I think it's really about understanding your business and understanding what solutions are really needed, and then using frankly, technology to accelerate existing process and culture versus the other way around, maybe.
We touched on this a little bit earlier, but just with the hybrid and remote work situation, that can make things really challenging. I know in our newsroom, it's hard to have that culture of learning, of just chatting and talking about things and going places that you normally wouldn't talk about online when you have a scheduled meeting. Steve, can you talk a bit more about how can we create this connectivity when it comes to upskilling and reskilling?
It's actually interesting because I've been thinking for the last 10 or 15 minutes about something that could be a pitfall as well, but just a point that I think is really important for this discussion, and that's the skills focus can be on really hyper-individualized, on taking an individual's profile and understanding the individual's skills. And the thing I've been hoping to have an opportunity to talk about, and now I'm going to mold your question into this,
okay.
is a focus on collectivism over pure individualism. What skills does a team have? What skills do we as a team have? So if I'm the leader of a team, I've got 5 direct reports, can we get together and say, we have the skill to do this together? Not what does Steve have, and Kamara's on my team, what does she have, and what does Marin have on my team? What is our collective capability? Can we shift a go-to-market strategy? What can we do together? And I think creating that culture of learning, if we start to focus a little bit more on what can 2 people do together, what can a team do together, what does a company, I've heard of organizational agility and learning mindset as an organizational skill. What are my company level skills? What skills does my company have? We can start to really, I think, tackle some of the connectivity of this, create that culture and connection to where when I'm partnering with someone, it's we need to build this skill together. That becomes a really strong impetus for developing some of these capabilities.
Can I just add one quick?
Yeah.
So I totally agree with Steve that you have to look at the org capability level. But again, the org capability has to look specifically at what are you trying to provide your member? Are you a member focused or a product focused? And what is your differentiator? Is it speed? Is it service? Is it innovation? Is it cost? Once you understand those, then you can define your core capabilities that differentiate you as a company, and then you can cascade that down throughout your organization. Again, that's what we have to help in the business, our business leaders think about, is what are the core capabilities that differentiate us for the customer that we serve? And then how do we take that capability and translate that down through the organization? And if we can't do that, then again, we might be working on stuff that the business doesn't really value.
And Marcus, in the last minute and a half that we have here, at the end of all this, how does a company even know how do they measure that this is all working? That's a big question for a minute and a half.
Yeah, it's a great question. Did we find that software that sits on top of the 4 systems? So some of the metrics we look at, they've been alluding to, nobody cares about butts in seats when it comes to training. Nobody cares about learner satisfaction except the people in this room. The members of your leadership team don't care. They want to see results. They want to see outcomes. So we focus on measuring ways where we can show something we're already measuring and then begin our intervention and then be able to indicate if we had an impact or not. And we can't always claim, 100% of the impact, right? We've been focusing on 90-day attrition. It got pretty high for a while there. And we've been able to reduce it by about 9%. I'm claiming about 40% of that reduction due to the interventions we've done out of the L&D team. And each % reduction calculates out to about $150,000 annually for the company. So it's a real value that we're adding from the L&D world that we can point to in the boardroom to say, here's our contribution to increasing our margins. So I would say just know if you're doing it all, look at something you're already measuring and see if you can improve it.
Great. Well, that's it for our panel. Thank you so much for your answers. Really appreciate it.